Okay, 2 tough acts to follow, but we're making up time, so now I've got to keep us on it. I want to thank you, Matt, and to all the organizers and for everyone for being here. It's good to be back after a short hiatus of a few years, the interregnum between the first conference and this one, after which we hope to continue every year in earnest. I'm Peter Copeland. I had the privilege of working with Matt and Dominic and Brendan, who couldn't be here in the early years, where the pandemic actually afforded an opportunity to build out the content and what Catholic Conscience was able to do. And I now work for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, one of Canada's major public policy think tanks, focused primarily on federal issues and those of national importance, where I lead the domestic policy program. And there must have been something in the air at the time of our last conference, and indeed there was an airborne flu, but we presented at the time on the common measures we use to assess human well-being and life satisfaction, their strengths and deficiencies, and a novel way to consider doing so. And lo and behold, Harvard decided to undertake a worldwide study of human flourishing, now in its 3rd iteration, called the Global Flourishing Study. And I do think, though, that this is a good illustration of the difference between correlation and causation, distinctions that are very important to today's discussion on human flourishing and how to measure it. And we're very pleased to have with us today someone working in that program. He's going to get into the details of what human well-being or flourishing is, what some common measures of it are, their strengths and deficiencies, and what the Global Flourishing Study tries to do to fill those gaps. But to start, I'll just say that as a think tank director, I'm interested in the public policy implications of measures of well-being, some of the most common of which GDP per capita and other static indicators like crime rates, lifespans, education levels, test score results, as well as subjective reports of life satisfaction. We mentioned the UN Happiness Survey. They're all important measures of broad outcomes that we know are in some way correlated with having a good life. But they really are just that. Outcomes that don't necessarily tell us about both the unique lives of individuals, as for one, they don't track unique individuals over time, or the deeper elements of well-being, which are often the strengths of our bonds, the sense of meaning and purpose that we have in our lives. And so, while correlated with many of these good outcomes, GDP per capita, for example, only captures monetized transactions and assumes any economic transaction is an increase in value, including those that I would say quite clearly do not increase human well-being, such as the economies of vice, like online gambling, the rise of internet-based forms of effectively prostitution, like the OnlyFans phenomenon, the sale of drugs, and also the technologies and business models that effectively commodify human attention and aim to maximize intention and engagement in ways that are oftentimes, quite demonstrably addictive. Exploitative labor, many others. And so that's what's wrong with some of those common measures. There's also subjective life satisfaction surveys, and so the UN Happiness Survey is a good example. It was just released again earlier this year. Conceives of well-being as simply subjective life satisfaction, measured through self-reports and nothing more. I think when you take a closer look, these models tend to assume an understanding of human flourishing that's very often at odds with a richer understanding of well-being. To varying degree, they conceive of it as purely subjective, the product of maximizing choice and practicing self-expression. They assume material prosperity and other material indicators are of great importance, which they certainly are, but as though happiness were the product of maximizing control, choice, and acquisition.
They fail in many respects to understand both that humans have a nature, which certainly is moldable, shapeable, and can be individualized to the unique person, but they also have objective features, even a core set of ends and purposes that fulfill us in a deep way. And that is just, I would say, the issue of the conceptualization of well-being that is implicit in these models and its measurement. There's also the question of its implications for politics, policy, and society. It's relatively easy to establish correlations, say, between the rise in smartphone and social media use that we've seen in the latest UN Happiness Survey and the attendant declines in subjective well-being over time as a result of it. Or, for example, the deindustrialization, particularly present in Anglosphere countries, and its relationship to labor arbitrage, unrestrained models of international trade, and the lack of industrial policy. And that all those things would be consistent with other literature. But it's another thing to draw inferences about those broad outcomes and the factors behind them, and then to attempt to conceive a set of policy interventions to remedy them. And so I hope someday, when I have more time at my disposal, to find ways both of measuring and understanding the nature and well-being of people as they develop over time. In particular, what are the crucial factors or steps required for the development of capacities that lead to flourishing? An example here is the success sequence. Finish secondary school, get a job, married before you have children, and that virtually guarantees you to avoid poverty. But it's ultimately pretty thin, and it doesn't say much about important features that lead to a good life, such as educational formation, character development, religiosity, the importance of certain key institutions, behaviors, and belief, such as having an intact family, mother and father, and strong friend networks, for example. And I also think we need to have better tools to understand the whole effect of a policy by attempting to quantify the expected side effects. And so oftentimes, we would like to tell a story based off of the limited things we concern ourselves with in our measurements. And so it's very easy to tell, a just-so story, right, based on what you do and don't measure. It can give ultimately an inaccurate picture of the effects. And I think it even encourages an overly simplistic, oftentimes very active interventionist approach that I think we've seen over time, in the developed world, through the rise of the welfare state, of very extensive bureaucracies, the undermining of those mediating institutions that we'll see through, in fact, the Global Flourishing Study are very crucial to human well-being. Things like the family, like civil society, and like religious organizations, all of which have declined considerably in the Western world over time. And I also think it'd be really interesting to be able to produce a normative model of human flourishing at both an individual and a social level to act as a kind of measure for policy interventions. And there are, in fact, some pretty interesting techniques out there that can get us some way to doing so. Rather than looking at snapshots of indicators and correlating them with certain interventions, the technique known as causal modeling is being deployed more and more across the social sciences. It uses diagrammatic mapping and algebra to map hypothesized cause and effect pathways between an intervention and an outcome, and it attempts to account for all of the confounding variables that we know exist, like my attempt to claim credit for Harvard's development of the Global Flourishing Study through correlation. And so by doing that, it estimates the causal weight of different variables that an intervention could interact with in its relationship to the ultimate outcome it's trying to achieve. And so it's a much richer tool than simple statistics, especially for social science and public policy, because it can model how many interacting factors shape outcomes over time. And so, like the Human Flourishing Program and the Global Flourishing Study, this model of human nature upon which it is based, which is it is very close to the Catholic intellectual tradition, which has strong Aristotelian and Thomistic influences that understand, the person as a set of capacities, that can be developed with a specific end. And so you might hear more from me about how the policy implications of measures of well-being in our Q&A, but before we do so, I'm going to turn it over now to Tucker Sigourney to tell us about Harvard's Human Flourishing Program and the Global Flourishing Study. While he's getting his laptop ready here, I'll just say a bit about him. So Tucker is a John and Daria Berry postdoctoral fellow at Harvard University's Human Flourishing Program. His academic work focuses on ethics, philosophy of action, practical reason, moral psychology, and the Thomistic Aristotelian tradition. He describes his central interests as ethics and philosophy of mind and action, drawing especially on Aquinas, Anscombe, Kierkegaard, Scotus, and others, and he holds degrees in physics and philosophy from Grove City College and a PhD from Florida State University. So without further ado, please welcome Tucker.
Okay, hi. Apologies for the hiccup. This is my first slide. This is who I am and what I'm doing. I'm Tucker. So I am a postdoctoral fellow at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard, which is, a research initiative that I'm going to be talking about. The overview that I'm giving will be of one of the things that the program does, which we call the Global Flourishing Study, and I will be quick. So that's all the words accounted for, I think. Here's the general outline. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the study, the methodology of it, and then I'm going to get into some of the results that we've had come in so far, and then some implications. So first, the Human Flourishing Program was founded at Harvard in 2016 by Tyler Vanderweel. It currently consists of between 10 and 30, depending on how you count, team of people from various disciplines, psychologists, sociologists, health practitioners, public health researchers, educators, education researchers. I'm in the philosopher and theologian category myself. The mission of the program is to study and promote human flourishing and to develop systematic approaches to the synthesis of knowledge across disciplines, so sort of a two-pronged mission, part of which is academic and social scientific, sort of on the theory side, and part of which is application. The Global Flourishing Study is one of our projects. So, as Peter was just mentioning, it hasn't always been true that societies have tried to sort of plan their, constituencies. Governments have tried to plan the societies that they've governed. Corporations have tried to plan their market bases. People haven't always had this sort of top-down mentality toward planning the various aspects of human life. But we do now. And if you're going to do that, it's good to have eyes. So it's good to be able to see where the people that you're in charge of are and where they're moving, and it's good to be able to get some feedback on how what you're doing is influencing them and how that matters. That's sort of the role that social science plays with respect to various politics is the main example, of course, but various efforts to determine the general direction a population is moving. Cultural initiatives, that sort of thing you might call them. So as one example, in health, the definition that the World Health Organization has been using of health since 1948 is of a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. As it happens, though, what they measure is disease and infirmity. And that's pretty much it. In psychology, we speak of well-being all the time. Usually, by well-being, they mean something like a sort of like general goodness of your life or something like that. That's sort of the vague idea behind it. But you have to like operationalize this, of course. And so you have to have a specific thing that you're going to measure. You have to have a thing that you ask people about and collect data on, and that's the number that you put in your paper. That, as it happens in practice, is almost always life satisfaction, which is usually measured by a question or two addressed to a person, something like, how satisfied are you with your life right now? Scale of 1 to 10. These measures pretty systematically, actually. So psychology is a broad discipline. A lot of stuff happens in psychology, but an awful lot of psychological research actually does explicitly avoid questions of like character. And that's mostly for like, if you're being charitable, you could call them methodological reasons, because who is a psychologist to tell you what your character should be? They try to be standoffish about that. And it's also partly just pragmatic, like it's kind of just hard. It's a difficult thing to measure. And psychologists also tend to exclude health and leave that to the doctors, like the physical side of health. They talk about mental health plenty. In the end, between all of these various approaches to measuring how your society is doing, the overall picture that we get from the measurements tends to be pretty much limited to these things: disease rate, GDP, life satisfaction, and a couple like minor variations on those things. Okay, so that's kind of why the Human Flourishing Program is a thing. We define flourishing in a sort of similarly ambitious way. A state in which all the aspects of a person's life, including the contexts in which the person lives, are good. You'll notice it's like even more ambitious than the other two definitions on the previous slide. It includes the contexts in which the person lives, so even bigger. The difference, if I can like put it in a sort of salesman-y way, the difference between the Human Flourishing Program and many other population measurement initiatives so far is that we try to get all of that somewhere into the data. So here's how we do it. This is going to be, to a certain degree, I think I mentioned at the beginning, for purposes of this presentation, I'm talking pretty much just about what the program that I'm a part of does, not so much my own work as like what we do. So just consider me an ambassador. This is the one place where I'm going to like editorialize a little bit. Because I think the Human Flourishing Program's Secure Flourishing Index, that's what we call this, is actually a pretty decent like metric of how you're doing as a human being according to like a sort of broadly Aristotelian or Thomistic conception of the human being. Because, well, so hear me out for a second. If you're an Aristotelian, then happiness is activity according to virtue. Happiness is the point of life. That's just the term for the sort of like total fullness of the life that a human being characteristically lives. That's what we are aiming at. Activity according to virtue is like an action, like a literal thing that you do. On the Aristotelian conception, living your life is an active thing. It's a thing that you're doing. But it requires a bunch of other stuff. In order to live a good life, you need to like live in the biological, like purely homeostatic sense. You need to have the health of mind and body required to like do the stuff that living consists in. Virtue is the thing according to which happiness is an activity, right? So good character is that from which you act, doing the things in which a good human life consists, right? If you're doing bad person things, or even if you happen to be doing the correct things but not from a disposition that's concerned with those things, then you're just kind of like living by accident. You're not living a good and purposeful and fully human life. That's all in virtue. Valuable activity, we've already talked about. Pleasure, in the Aristotelian view, is the sort of like crown and completion of activity. When you're doing something well and you get that, and it like carries forward to completion, that's what pleasure consists in. For Aristotle, pleasure is not this like sheer dopamine rush thing where like something is plugged into your brain, or could be, and that would make you as pleased as you would ever be. Pleasure is the completion of an activity, right? So again, not so much exactly a feeling. It is a feeling, or maybe more accurately, a complex of feelings. But it has an active component. It's more than that. So you want to talk about pleasure at the local and global level. That is, how much are you enjoying the things that you're doing now or day to day, and how much are you enjoying your life on its total trajectory. So those are kind of things you might want to ask if you want to assess whether the virtuous activities in which you're partaking are reaching their completion. Relationships. The last 3, 4 books, 7, 8, 9, 10 of the Nicomachean Ethics are about friendship, because Aristotle thinks that human relationships are extremely important, partly as the context in which virtuous activity takes place, and partly because some of the things that you do are common. They're things that you do together with other people. So you can't do them if there aren't other people. You need to have good relationships with those other people in order to do some of what it takes to live a good human life. Finally, material security. This is one place in which Aristotle departs from his Stoic contemporaries. In order to do good things, sometimes you just need to have stuff. One good thing to do is giving to charity, for example, but if you don't have anything to give, then you can't. Another good thing to do is I don't know, fulfilling a hobby that you have. You just have a thing that you enjoy doing, woodworking, say. But if you never have free time, then you can't do that because, well, woodworking takes time. So on Aristotle's view, you have to have some amount of material stability just as a baseline. It's not what happiness consists in, but if you don't have it, you're not flourishing. Does that all make sense? Okay, so this is all just me giving Aristotelian background in argument that these are things that you would want to ask someone about if you're trying to figure out whether that person is living a good life. If you want to get a complete picture of how someone's life is going, these are things that you can ask about, that you can get a number on, which will translate not perfectly, but will do a better job than some slightly simpler metrics, translating whether that person is living a good life into a thing that you can actually operationalize in social science. So, in an attempt to do that, the study started in, 2016. That was when the original idea for it was conceived. It actually finally reached its first round of data collection on April 30th, 2025. It's a cooperation between these 4 institutions, funded by these lovely people. The principal investigators are Tyler Vanderwill, who's my boss, and Byron Johnson, who's at Baylor in Texas. The study comprises over 207,000 participants. So that's really big. If you don't have the social scientific context to know whether that's good or not, it's really good. 22 countries, 23 if you count Hong Kong, on 6 continents, representation for 64% of the global population, meaning the countries that the study covers comprise 64% of the global population. And the goal is to have collected 5 years of data by wave 5. We are currently in wave 3. That doesn't mean we've collected 3 waves of data. We collected at half a year. So we've gone at time 0, at time 1/2, at time 1, and then we'll go for later rounds so we can get longitudinal data in addition to that initial burst of information at the beginning. Here are the questions that we ask. Now this is the thing that I earlier called the Secure Flourishing Index. This is the literal set of questions that we ask as measurements of the Secure Flourishing Index. I'm going to read them because I would like you to have time to think about what it is that we're asking people. You might notice they're labeled, they're color-coded by the little editorial description or defense of them that I gave earlier, just in case that's a thing that you care about. Overall, how satisfied are you with your life as a whole these days? In general, how happy or unhappy do you usually feel? In general, how would you rate your physical health? How would you rate your overall mental health? Overall, to what extent do you feel the things that you do in your life are worthwhile? I understand my purpose in life. I always act to promote the good in all circumstances, even in difficult and challenging situations. I'm always able to give up some happiness now for greater happiness later. I'm content with my friendships and relationships. My relationships are as satisfying as I would want them to be. How often do you worry about being able to meet normal monthly living expenses? And how often do you worry about safety, food, or housing? All of those are answered on a scale from 1 to 10, with 0 being the bad one and 10 being the good one, so that you can get everything on the same even scale and do an aggregate measure of all of them that we just call the Secure Flourishing Index score, which is just the average of your responses to these questions. The other questions on the survey, there are about 60 more. The other questions on the survey all track various aspects of your demographics, your childhood experiences, other aspects of your life, things that you might consider drivers of flourishing. So there's stuff like your age, religious experience as a child, your experiences with your mother and father. I wrote the whole list of questions down if you'd like to ask me later about what's on the survey. All the data are open access and publicly available, which is awesome. And over 90 analytical papers on the results have been published so far just by our team. So that's not including people who have written on the open access data from other places. Plus some reports and popular articles and stuff, all of which you can see if you want by going to our website. It's all free. Here are some of the findings so far. So from the initial waves of data that we've collected, there's sort of confirmation of a broader finding. I should check my time. I actually don't know how long I should go now that we've had a break. 5 minutes. All right. I'll blaze through this. So there's some confirmation from, there is confirmation in the Global Flourishing study of what looked like it was going to be true from earlier research, namely that young people used to be doing pretty well and now are doing less well. Traditionally, if you had measured how young people are doing and then how middle-aged people are doing and then how old people are doing, you get a sort of curve that looks like this. You're really happy earlier in life, you're enjoying things are great. You're struggling around middle age, and then you're happier later in life. That's just kind of how life has gone for people, usually, for as long as we've been measuring these things ever. Now, as of 2024 or something, the curve looks like this, on average for most places. That's not true everywhere, I'll get to some exceptions later. But young people have dropped. Old people have not gotten better, middle-aged people have not gotten better, young people have dropped on the measure and are now getting happier as they age, which sounds fun, but it's better if you're just doing better in general. So we might want to think about what to do about that. Another confirmation of earlier findings in the Global Flourishing study, but sort of with an interesting twist that I'll talk about in the Q&A if you want to, is that wealth doesn't seem to help either. Overall flourishing nearly correlates negatively with GDP, which is insane if you think about it, because part of the index was your material well-being, right? So that's including the fact that that's in the measure. It still correlates almost negatively. And that's mainly down to the fact that it does correlate negatively with meaning and purpose in life. So we can talk about why that is, but I'll just note it for now. More interesting confirmations of previous research, although the Global Flourishing study makes a significant contribution to this one. Religion does seem to help substantially, not a small effect. Putting a number to it is kind of meaningless, but it's a very large effect. Religious service attendance seems to correlate significantly positively with, with flourishing almost everywhere. And that does actually, again, this is a thing we can talk about in the Q&A if you want, that does seem to be causal. There's actually really good evidence for that one being causal. Less well in some other dimensions, but that one's good. Adversity is complicated. This is another kind of interesting one. Some negative childhood experiences correlate positively with some dimensions of flourishing. So for example, in the US, financial difficulty in childhood correlates with an increased sense of meaning in adulthood, while others don't. Notably, depressive symptoms and stuff like that seem to just be bad the whole way through. If you look at all the countries, here's what you get. The picture on the left is data from waves 1 and 2. Picture on the right is fresh off the press. I just got our stats guy to make me this chart yesterday. This is the wave 3 data. Yeah. And so these are the 23 countries that we measure. I'll just leave this here for a second so that you can look at it while I point out a couple of things that are interesting. First, all the like high income countries here are like spread out across the spectrum. So that's an interesting thing to note. The lowest country on the whole thing is Japan, and not by a little, and then Turkey, and then there's a group in the middle, and then you've got a top group comprising Israel, Indonesia, Poland, Mexico, and the Philippines, who are sort of like not by a large number, but substantially in terms of the like noticeability of their leading of the pack, ahead of everyone else, like markedly ahead of the rest of the pack, which is like crazy. You might ask, why that? Why did that happen? And we could talk about some of the more specific results there again in the Q&A if you like. Different populations seem to have different strengths and weaknesses in the Flourishing Index. So if you ask how each country does on each of the the rest of those 60 questions that might be considered indicators of flourishing, you can pull apart countries by how many of the measures are like low globally and how many are high globally. And some countries have low measures globally, have large numbers of low measures at the global scale. And some countries have high numbers of good measures at the global scale. So, for example, Indonesia has strengths in like 14 indicators, while Japan has weaknesses in like 20. Meaning like a lot of things in Japan are worse than they are in the rest of the, as compared with the rest of the world, and a couple of them are about the same. Whereas in Indonesia, a lot of things are as good as they are in the world, and a couple things are about the same as they are in the rest of the world. And that's just another way of like getting a sense of how countries are doing and what might be contributing to their overall score. Here are some patterns and outliers. Generally, oh, thanks. Oh, so bad at this. That's what I just said, so I'll just leave that there for a second. Okay, that's been a second. Here are some other patterns and outliers. So men and women are usually very similar, but women are doing better in Japan by an actually significant number, and men are doing better in Brazil, which again is crazy, which for reasons that we can talk about if you want to at the Q&A. In general, married people do better by quite a bit, except in two places, Tanzania and India. Flourishing generally increases with age, but here are the exceptions that I said I would mention earlier. Not in Egypt, India, Israel, Kenya, Philippines, Poland, and Tanzania. In all of those places, you get, well, okay, so in two of them, and I forget which two, you get a sort of negative correlation. And in a couple of the others, you get a sort of like that. Why is that happening? Who knows? Again, we can speculate. That one I have less to actually say about. We can speculate about it in the Q&A if you want to. Here are some implications. So partly on the basis of these results and partly just on the basis of common sense, the Human Flourishing Program identifies 4 important pathways to flourishing. These are areas in which we can significantly improve the lives of people who participate in these activities, communities, relational dimensions: family, religious community, work, education. So in light of findings like this, policymakers might want to consider like intervening in those dimensions in ways that make positive differences. And as Peter mentioned, in ways that don't like just enforce some kind of like top-down initiative straight to the bottom, but that intervene via the institutions that usually constitute how you live your life, like the church, like your family, like other communities that you might be a part of. So here are just a couple of suggestions. We might want to figure out what's causing global changes to young people's flourishing, how it can be addressed. There is very good evidence by now that social media is bad. Yeah, just straight up bad, it's poison. There is some evidence that other things might also be contributing to that though, so we don't want to like put it all on social media. We might want to think more carefully about how to help young people out. We might want to wonder about how to promote economic development without compromising social engagement and sense of meaning. This is what we were talking about earlier with the fact that senses of meaning and purpose in life tend to correlate negatively with your country's GDP, which is which does not mean that being rich makes you a more cynical, like less purposeful person. But you might want to think about like how to do economic development in a way that doesn't make your population cynical and purposeless, if that makes sense. This is not like causal inference so much, but it does matter that you do economic development in a sensitive way rather than just straight up pushing more money into things. Religious and spiritual roots for flourishing seem to be extremely important and seem to have been neglected basically completely up to this point. That might be a thing we could work on. Here are some sources and resources. If you would like me to forward you the presentation so that you can click on them, I'd be happy to do that. If you'd like to take the survey, here you go. Just the initial, just the Secure Flourishing Index, not the whole 70 question thing. And this is just for fun if you want to do it. I can show you the results. If you would all like to whip out your phones and take the survey, I can show you how this room compares to the US. But we won't enter this into the data set because it's not properly controlled. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. So we plan to do more Q&A, but we obviously had some technical difficulties. So we're going to take 3 from the audience, and hopefully you can do your best to respond to each of them. I'm going to add one of my own as well, Tucker, which is Mexico, Philippines, Indonesia, Israel, right at the top. I speculate that some others have commented that these are highly religious, less secular, less individualistic, more communitarian, or more socially conservative, higher marriage rates, family rates, and that these are doing the lion's share of the explanation. So that's the first question, and let's take a couple more. Okay, Josie.
It sounds like you asked about family structure, so can I ask what specifically you asked about family structure? Like, are the parents still together, same-sex parents, divorced, etc.? And what does the data say about the impact of human flourishing?
Okay, so family structure. Okay, take a couple more and take them all at once. Okay. It's a challenge, but yeah, right here.
So mine was one of the slides that maybe got abbreviated. I think it said that the U.S. respondents said freedom was low. Did I misread that?
Yes.
So I was going to ask what the question was about freedom and why that might be.
Yeah, good question.
Okay, and last one, right here.
What is the justification to underpin the whole platform, theoretically speaking at least, in Aristotelian virtue ethics as opposed to, say, the ontology that puts more emphasis in human autonomy, or utilitarianism that puts emphasis on agency? Why that?
Cool. Okay. You have to remind me how old
I will.
The first question was about the drivers of greater flourishing numbers in these So that bears out in the data. The metrics on which is everyone who's going to use the QR code done right now? Cool. The metrics on which these top 5 countries do better are the more, you could call them humanitarian ones, the character, virtue, meaning and purpose, post-social relationships dimensions, and that's basically driving the increase in their score over the more developed nations who are in the middle of the pack, the UK, the US, those sorts of places.
Family structure.
Yeah, there was a question about family structures,
freedom in the US, and then the underlying philosophies.
Yeah, you have to remind me what the question about family structures was.
What specifically did you ask about family structure, and how does that impact human flourishing?
Yeah, a whole bunch of stuff. You can go read the whole set of questions if you want. It's available on the little report thing that's on the website. But for example, how was your relationship with your father growing up? Did you think your father loved you growing up? Did your mother attend religious services? Did your father, do we ask a question about how many other children are in the house? Yes. How many children are the age of 18 living in your house? A number of questions about childhood experiences of family life, and then a couple of questions about your family demographics now. And then, of course, there are also questions about your close social relationships, whether you have people in your life that you can trust. And then there's the literal close social relationships questions, here. I don't know. Does that give you an idea of what you're asking for?
Yeah.
Okay.
So freedom and the underlying.
Yeah, okay. So, where was that? Yeah. So, these are, again, things on which the U.S. is doing poorly relative to everyone else in the world as compared with how it's doing on the rest of the indicators that we asked about. So in other words, these are things that the U.S. answered lower on than it answered on the rest of the questions relative to the total global distribution of answers. Okay, social trust, very low. That's something like how do you trust your government, or do you trust that your government is looking out for you?
Interpersonal as well, right?
Yeah, I could look up the actual questions that we asked about that. It probably has the word trust in it, so I can control that. Yeah. So how many people in this country trust one another? That's one of the questions. There was one on freedom though, which I wanted to look up. Yeah, I have the freedom in my life to pursue the things that are most important to me. That is the question that determines that the freedom measure is low relative to the others. Yeah. All right, so, I don't know, did you want me to speculate about why the U.S. measures low on that?
I'm curious about. I think it's a little provocative.
Yeah.
If it's the freest country in the world, or what's happening?
Yeah, I know. Crazy. I expect it's partly a jobs and social mobility thing. People are increasingly worried about jobs. I also think there's probably an effect whereby Americans have high expectations for this sort of thing and they're not being met, whereas other countries might have lower expectations for them. I don't think those two things explain why it's lowest on that of everything in the world. We have to think more about that. But I don't. There may actually be a paper in that group of 90 that I mentioned on why that is. I just haven't looked. But if there is, that'd be interesting.
Okay, and the last one is why aren't we utilitarian?
Yeah, why not utilitarians?
No, it's why.
Sorry.
I mean, Aristotle is fine. I just published about this. The question is why not to put emphasis also utilitarianism and the ontology as basis for the whole project? Because virtue ethics is clear, but there are other systems.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I appreciate you asking it because this is finally my real wheelhouse. The answer is basically just that virtue ethics gives you a picture of what a good human being looks like and what a good human life looks like. The other ethical systems don't. The other ethical systems are what we might call purely prescriptive. So in deontology, you have rules for how to behave, which sort of limit the various things that you can do. And sometimes they do positive duties, although there's skepticism about what doesn't ever be a thing.
Purely descriptive.
You what?
Kantianism, not purely descriptive. That's normal.
Is what?
The ontology.
Proscriptive. Meaning it tells you what to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Proscriptive. Okay.
Yeah, right. Which, you could ask questions that would get at whether you're doing the things that deontology would tell you to do, and you can ask questions that would get at whether you're doing the things that utilitarianism would tell you to do. But you can't ask questions that get at whether you're living a good human life according to utilitarianism, or whether you're living a good human life according to deontology, because those systems just aren't descriptions of what a good life looks like, whereas virtue ethics is.
They just assume that the prescriptions are by default.
Yeah, they're just not trying to tell you that. It's just not one. Yeah, it's just straight up not one of the things that those branches of ethics are doing. So yeah, that's it.
Well, that was excellent. Thank you.